Picture this. Imagine working hard all month, only to have your life savings literally rot away. Or actually even die of old age. I know, it sounds totally absurd to us today, right? But for early civilizations that were using grain and cattle as money, this was a very real, massive problem. I mean, how are you supposed to build an empire or even just plan for your family's future when your bank account has a literal expiration date?
Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this. Today we're exploring a really profound technological leap that completely reinvented how humans cooperate. We're talking about the Metallurgical Revolution, and how the birth of coinage didn't just give us some shiny pocket change, it fundamentally invented the concept of economic trust. Here's our roadmap for the day. First, the limits of early money. Then, the rise of precious metals. After that, we'll hit the technological leap of smelting, followed by the birth of coinage. And finally, we'll wrap up with power and debasement. Let's get to it.
All right, part 1. The limits of early money.
So in the old world, wealth was measured in everyday commodities, things like grain and cattle. But imagine trying to buy a plot of land with a literal herd of cows. They are incredibly bulky, your grain is going to spoil if the weather turns bad, and cattle, well, they require constant feeding and a ton of high maintenance. As these civilizations started to expand, those physical limitations became a massive bottleneck. Humanity absolutely needed an upgrade, and enter the new world of metals. Think about it. Metals are beautifully durable, highly portable, and you can divide them up perfectly without losing a drop of value. This wasn't just a simple swap of materials. This was a total financial revolution that really laid the foundation for our modern global system.
So, let's move right into part 2, the rise of precious metals.
As people sought out materials with the best physical properties, this natural hierarchy kind of just developed. Right at the base, we have copper. Because it was so abundant, it naturally became the go-to for smaller everyday transactions. Then, moving up a step, we find silver. Silver had a really high value-to-weight ratio, which made it the absolute standard for larger exchanges and precise accounting. And finally, sitting right at the very top, gold. Thanks to its extreme rarity and, lasting beauty, it was reserved for the highest value transactions and acted as this incredible long-term store of wealth.
Now, to put this into perspective, just keep the number 3000 in mind. By 3000 BCE over in ancient Mesopotamia, silver wasn't just being traded randomly anymore. It was actually already standardizing as a unit of account. It was carefully measured out in specific weights, which you might know as the shekel. But even with these metals, there was still a major, seriously agonizing hurdle in day-to-day trade.
Which brings us to part 3, smelting, and this incredible technological leap.
Here's the problem. Trading raw metal rings and chunks of bars meant that you had to painfully test and weigh them for every single transaction. You never really knew exactly what you were getting. But smelting changed the whole game. It's the technological process of extracting metal from ore using intense heat, and it produces metals with a totally consistent composition and quality. This was an absolutely critical achievement because that consistent quality directly and immediately skyrocketed trust among traders.
Let's trace how incredibly fast these ideas accelerated across time. We start around 4000 BCE, where the dominance of metals first begins. Then we jump to 3000 BCE with those Mesopotamian silver shekels we just talked about. And then, fast forward to the 7th century BCE, right on the borders of modern-day Turkey in a region called Lydia. This is where this new technological skill finally met state authority, and it resulted in the creation of the first known coins, made from a naturally occurring gold and silver alloy called electrum.
And that massive breakthrough leads us directly into part 4, the birth of coinage.
Those early Lydian coins solved the paralyzing uncertainty of the raw metal trade once and for all. Money transformed from just being a simple commodity into a certified unit of value. I mean, imagine the absolute relief of an ancient merchant. For the first time ever, they can just throw away their heavy scales and their testing touchstones. A coin stamped with an official mark guarantees its weight and its purity instantly. Value is finally certified, meaning you can literally just count your money instead of constantly weighing it.
And this idea of standardized trust spread like wildfire. The Greek city-states, Athenian silver drachma, became this widely accepted international currency, crossing borders completely effortlessly. Meanwhile, you have the Persian Empire utilizing coinage to standardize payments and taxation across incredibly vast territories. By officially guaranteeing the metal, the speed and the scale of trade for these empires absolutely skyrocketed.
But as you might guess, with great financial innovation comes great political temptation. And that brings us to our final section, power and debasement.
The second rulers started stamping their own faces on coins, money completely shifted. It went from being a purely market-driven commodity into an institutionally backed instrument of trust. And this brilliantly illustrates the unbelievable administrative power this gave governments. First, they could now collect taxes in predictable, standardized units. Second, they could pay armies of soldiers and vast networks of officials super efficiently. And third, they could communicate their political legitimacy just by having the ruler's face circulating in literally every merchant's pocket. Local treasuries suddenly transformed into these massive logistical engines for the state.
However, there is a dark side to all this immense power. When financial strain inevitably hit, governments faced a massive temptation to break the public's trust through a process called debasement. And debasement is simply reducing the precious metal content of coins while maintaining their face value to finance state spending. Basically, it's an incredibly easy way for a ruler to stretch the treasury a little further without officially having to announce a wildly unpopular tax hike.
Let's look at one of history's most famous and consequential examples of this. The Roman Empire repeatedly debased its currency just to pay for its massive mounting expenses. Now, while this did provide some short-term financial relief, the long-term consequences were absolutely devastating. It led to severe inflation and a catastrophic loss of public confidence. It's a perfect historical example showing us that no matter how powerful an empire is, money absolutely requires disciplined governance.
So, the crucial point is really this. Money derives its value not just from its physical material, but from the authority and the discipline behind it. What started out as a technological revolution, pulling shiny metals out of the dirt and smelting them into consistent shapes, ultimately became the psychological bedrock of modern finance. Trust isn't just about how durable the metal is, it's entirely about the reliability of the social contract backing it all up.
Which leaves us with this final, truly critical question to ponder. We've seen how metal bridged the gap between raw commodities and complex financial systems. But if trust can be broken by the very empires that mint the coins, what is the ultimate anchor of wealth? When human authority fails, where exactly does value go? Well, as the world sought even greater, unshakable stability, one specific metal would eventually rise above all the rest. But we'll have to explore that fascinating shift in our next explainer. Thanks so much for joining me today.